Thank you, Shashank. Thank you, everyone. Great to see all of you. And yeah, I had to press the recording button before it would have interrupted Shashank or anyone. So, yeah, welcome. Lovely to read all about what brought all of us here today. And I think just to give a context to some people who may be engaging with Sadanand Ji for the first time, although there are a lot of familiar faces, but there are also some new people joining us today in this satsang. So something I will go on to repeat some of the things that we have already shared in the invite, that how at the prime of his youth, Sadanand Ji made certain choices which were not very conventional. He found a guru in the form of Baba Haridas, and he followed that path. The journey took the form of co-founding Mount Madonna Center in the US, Sri Ram Ashram in Haridwar, and even currently one of his explorations is to bring science and spirituality together. And I think I would see him as an educator and a lifelong student of yoga. And that's like the formal introduction to give a little bit of context. And I think while I was thinking that, and also in the company of Sadanand Ji, we've been engaged in a dialogue based space called Samvad, which has been rooted in compassion, curiosity, empathy. And we've been learning in the company of each other as the space that he facilitates. He has been facilitating with all of us, for all of us. And while I was thinking, I remembered a moment when, in the pre-pandemic times, Sadanand would bring students of Mount Madonna Center who would be about to graduate. They would come to India, and in one such moment, some of us from Youth Alliance community had joined all of them. We were in a restaurant having lunch, and one of the teachers, Shannon, had joined along on the trip. And so Sadanand was sitting right next to her, and he said that, oh, she's my daughter. So I ended up asking, oh, how many other children do you have? And then there would be about 20-25 of us sitting on a huge table, and he's like, you're my child, you're my child. He pointed to everyone in the room, and he said, and then I realized, oh, biologically he didn't choose to have children, but there are like hundreds and thousands of lives that he has touched, uh, and all of us are his adopted children, whom he has showered with so much love and care. All of these years, I think, be it the students at the Mount Madonna Center, Sri Ram Ashram, and all the communities that he has touched through his presence. So yeah, I think that's one story I remembered. And I think I can say this on behalf of most of us who have engaged with him, that any conversation with him means that you would end up feeling so much better about your own self. Like, he would say that, oh, like, what you just said, it was so magical. So he enables each person around him to see the magic that is there within them. So yeah, I think and also he happens to be one of the best storytellers that I have at least come across. And while we were having a pre-conversation to this satsang with him, we realized that this conversation may not have a lot of explanation, but a lot of stories weaved together in this process. And um, we also realize that he's always very curious. Like, I think one of the values that he has held throughout his life is that of curiosity. And I think within that, you know, like, so many people our age in their 20s or 30s would be wondering, oh, what's next for me, what is the aim of my life. And it's so beautiful to see him at his age to also have these questions constantly, like, because it's not like the journey is there in, like the idea of age as a number like doesn't really hold here, because he we also see him as a continuous learner, holding curiosity, following different paths of exploration. uh, and even now, since last year we have been learning about the marrying of science and spirituality along with him, and all the teachers that he has also found on his way. um, so yeah, excited to hear Sadanand Ji's story. And to begin that, I think I would want to ask him that, since you've held curiosity as such a close value in your life all along, right now, how is it that it is so fresh and alive for you even at this point in your life? And tell us a bit more about how it has guided you um, till now.
Okay, well, thank you for that incredibly generous introduction. I don't know if I can live up to my billing, but um, I was also very curious. And what I loved about the beginning of this conversation is that when I wrote down in my notebook, as I was thinking about this, right, I'm curious about why it was important for people to be here. Um, why you showed up. And then I realized that your questions will answer that question for me. So curiosity, I think we're born with that. I think that that's innate in every human being. And I think I was extremely curious as a child, and I used to get in trouble for it. And I was curious one day what it would be like to draw on the garage door. I got seriously spanked for that. And then I went out and did it again. I was very curious about, what they call snapdragons, because when you squeeze them, they pop, you know? And I was doing that one day and I got spanked for that. And I went out and did it again. I also remember I got very curious about a spider behind the wood box, which turned out to be a black widow, and getting seriously reprimanded for being curious about a black widow, because they are, so I think what happens is our curiosity in some ways gets cauterized. And it gets cauterized by well-meaning adults who want to prevent us from getting in trouble, or disturbing their world. And then I think it gets cauterized in school when we get more information pushed at us than a human being can assimilate. I call it drinking from a fire hose. So I think I'm in sort of permanent recovery from that. And what I've learned along the way, I had a friend, Vivian Wright, who passed away just a couple of years ago, who was just a crazy, brilliant, zany human being. She was a consultant for Hewlett Packard, and during their very formative, explosive years. And she told me one day, she said, you should learn to trust your curiosity and follow your curiosity, because essentially it's your future calling. And she said, I've noticed that everything you've been curious about has wound up being useful to the development of Sri Ram Ashram and Mount Madonna Center and so on. And I don't know, it was a kind of an affirmation to trust your curiosity. Then in the work with Peter Block and small group pedagogy, which we bring into Samvad and almost everything we do, I discovered that curiosity was the doorway to empathy. that when you're really curious about another human being and you listen with curiosity rather than criticality, and you replace judgment and advice with questions of clarification, that real curiosity puts you in a state of empathy with that person. And their well-being and your well-being somehow become connected. And I guess I wasn't raised in an empathetic situation, so it opened the door to empathy for me. And empathy, of course, stands right next to love. So that's why I'm committed. And actually, it's not anything I'm as much committed to as I just follow my curiosity. So there's that. And then there was a second part to the question. Or maybe I answered it.
Like, how does it show up for you even in your life currently? Is
Yeah, how it shows up for me in my life is delight. Lately, I've been wandering in curiosity, and nothing's irrelevant. All learning is transferable. Everything you're curious about is a piece of a puzzle, and it's an infinite game. And I think what human beings do, if they're paying attention, is they're trying to make sense out of their lives and the reality in which they live in. And the more you expand your curiosity and knowledge base, the more you pay attention, the more things start to come into a kind of focus, because we know that biologically, as a structure, as a living system, that the world that we see is related to the shape of the mirror of the mind. And the mind, the mirror, is shaped by our initial condition, and then our history, and then the choices that we make about how we want to respond. And so I think that the more you can integrate your experiences, and the more you can be curious about yourself, and why did I think that? Why did I feel that? Why did I know that? You know, I think at that point, we start to create a relationship with the world that requires curiosity, not only about what's out there, but what's in here that determines how we see the out there. And then I think we can begin to take responsibility for our choices. So the aphorism, right, at this point for me would be, make the implicit explicit.
Sadanand Ji, could you say more about that?
Explain yourself. Yeah, okay. So if we look at it from a neurobiological perspective, right, you have the primitive brain, you have the limbic brain, which is the emotional mind, and emotions are there basically for survival, at least initially. And then you have the neocortex, which is the reasoning mind. We are so addicted to reasons. Reasons are our explanations about things. The experiences we have, we then explain, right? The problem is always in the explanation. That's how wars get started. We're explaining the world in a way where we create adversaries. If we understand that our reasoning is driven by our emotion, and our reasoning is the way we explain our emotions, our feelings about things, and our choices are based fundamentally emotionally as much as reasoning. Reasoning and emotion are work together, but emotion is a substratum. And so the domains in which we operate are based on what emotion we're operating in. And so I can walk in anger, or I can walk in love, or I can walk in curiosity, or I can walk in empathy. The walking is the same, but the domain is determined by the emotion that underlies what we're doing. And of course, we have Prajapati, the creator, started with fear, right? If we look at the Vedic interpretation of this, which I'm fond of doing, Prajapati discovered that, and I'm using the gender assigned by the Vedas, but for me, Prajapati is an it, not a he or a she. But Prajapati said, I am, and was immediately afraid. And then Prajapati reasoned on that and said, well, there's nothing, so there's nothing to be afraid of. And then Prajapati said, well, this is pretty boring. I need another. And so Prajapati created the world. And since there was nothing, the only thing Prajapati had to create the world out of was itself. But after he created the world, everything, Prajapati had been dismembered. So he called on Agni, the god of fire, and said, you know what? You need to sacrifice back to me so I can go on creating the world. And the waters heard, and the Agnihotra sacrifice was born. Now, what does that mean? You know, that's the question. So it's centered in the principle of Advaita. We are distinct but not separate. We must, everything in the world sacrifices for everything else. This is an ecological principle. And so there's this principle of, as we take out, we put back in order to sustain the creation. So it started with fervor, kama, love. What was that? That was the tendency for things to condense, which creates heat. Heat is tapas. Tapas means to burn, sacrifice. So Prajapati sacrificed in order to create the world, right? And the world unfolded, the cosmic order, Rita, right? And then there's Satya, truth. So Rita means that we're not living in chaos. There's an order to things. And Satya is that it's not a haphazard place. There's cause and effect. And so nature moves towards complexity, sentience. So we as human beings are sentient, and we go through the same process. We emerge. The first thing we go is, what the heck? And we cry, right? Being born is a very uncomfortable experience, in case you remember it, which is possible, I can tell you. And then there's the other, right? And the other then is this attraction. So we have both separateness and we have unity. And human beings are seeking unity. They want to know the all in all. You know, that's part of us, our curiosity to know what the heck is going on. Why am I here? What am I doing? What's useful? What do I do in this brief span of life? So I don't know if, drawing on the learnings and cultural traditions of India has been, I started on that without having a clue other than being curious. And then I discovered that it had a lot to do with cultural and neurobiology. And I thought, when you say I'm trying to merge those two, I don't even know that those words are appropriate words to be spoken separately. And I've discovered that the issue of reflection, which is deeply embedded in the DNA of Indian philosophy, is actually a scientific approach to life. And why is that? Well, because to reflect on something, you have to let go of it to actually reflect on it without the fear that somehow you're going to lose it. So in a scientific experiment, what you're doing is you're curious about something, and then you want to establish cause and effect by replicating it. But if you're determined to get the result that you want to get, you're going to skew the data. Well, the same thing's true in reflection. And so as I'm reflecting, I really need to let go of my predictable desired outcome to find out what is so. And of course, psychologically, what happens for us is that we spend our time justifying, because we feel there's a world out there, an objective, independent world that does things to us. But actually, neurobiologically, we can only respond to what is out there disturbing us, right? And we're responsible for our response. And once we learn that, then I think we change our world. And so to be curious about your response is a terribly important thing. So curiosity to me is at the core. The not knowing piece is not to give up and say, well, I don't know. It's to be curious and find out. So that's the journey. And I think the journey of life is about awareness. It's not necessarily about security and comfort, although those are very nice things. Okay, so I know I just wandered out into the pasture. You want to bring me back?
I think we covered a lot of field in the last few minutes that you went from almost dismantling a very core belief of our dominant culture, that it is which is that everything is based on reason and rationality, and we can figure our way out by explaining and giving reasons. And the people who can give better reasons to themselves and to the others tend to be successful than others. So to that you are offering that reason is is emotion masquerading itself. Like the emotion is at the base and reason is showing up on top. We are explaining ourselves by giving reasons. We are explaining our emotions by giving reasons. So this actually speaks to the heart of what we have been taught at school, what we are constantly told in our workplaces, that be logical, be reasonable, be rational. And you're saying that by being curious about, or at least that's what I'm hearing, that by being curious about my own response, I can become aware of what I'm feeling, what my emotion is, what my state is. And that shall impact how I see the world, how I view the world, and therefore how I act in the world. Thank you for that. You also,
You said it better than I did.
I'm just trying to kind of say it or rephrase it for myself, perhaps. I think, Sadanand Ji, also what I heard you speak about, also another question that every culture answers, that, okay, who am I and what's the meaning of this world? How did the world come into origin? And you went into the Vedic tradition and explaining from that. We come from that culture. I mean, there are multiple cultural lineages in India, and Vedas being one of them. And I think you drew on that. We perhaps will delve on it even further. But a question that I have for you is that when you were growing up, maybe when you were in your 20s and 30s, there must have been a certain explanation of the world as to who are you and what's your role in the world, and what's what do you call your what's the meaning of the world. And that was also a great time of great churn in the US and in the West, where the hippie movement was there, and many things, capitalism, world order was questioned at that time. And many of the things that we see today, like the internet, both good and bad, also were seeded in those times, in my perspective. So how has your perspective of who are you and what's your place in the world changed over the years? And how do we, as young people trying to figure out our place in the world, answer that question for ourselves? If there is a fun answer,
When you figure the answer to that, let me know. I want to just touch on one thing, because you raised a bunch of things there, and I'll come back to your question. But what is logic? when we say that's logical, it means that we've been included in a conversation where we accept the criteria of validation of whatever it is that is the subject. So that's inclusion in a conversation where we agree and we say, well, that's logical, you know. But let's say, I don't know, Vikash suddenly decided to stand on his head, we would be concerned about the logic of that in a Zoom conversation. Maybe not here, but quite possibly the things that we don't understand or we disagree with, we'll often say, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's not logical. So logic is a construct. Reason exists. And I'm not diminishing reasoning, but the problem is that we've diminished the impact and value of emotion. So I want to be clear that I'm not here to denigrate reason. I think this conversation is inclusion in a criteria of validation if what I say evokes your knowing in a way that you accept it. So the other thing is, I can't tell you something you don't know. I can evoke what you're knowing in language, and maybe at times use language in a way that helps you understand what you know, especially in this kind of conversation. Okay, got that off my chest. So let's go back to the question. How was I trained? You know, this is an explanation. It may or may not be true, but it was how I have filtered my experience. I think in the beginning, I was not wanted as a child because I did not fit the schedule that my parents had. I showed up a couple of years early. I was the third child and I came 8 days less than a year after my older sister was born. I think my mother's first impulse when she discovered she was pregnant was not positive. Now, how does that affect you in the womb? I'm not really sure. I wasn't that conscious then, but I think it had an impact. Being wanted, I think, was one of the drivers. Then I grew up in a family, a kind of a traditional family with, what could I say, emotionally unreachable father, a wonderful mother, and a wonderful father too. He was a great public servant. But not, he had 7 children and he treated us all equally by ignoring us mostly. But he also provided for us. And he was brilliant and very tough. I never got a compliment from him until 2 weeks before he died. It was what we call just-in-time planning. Which was highly ironic to me, but what the family, not just my father, but the whole clan, I was part of a clan, the Maillard clan, and they were all prominent people in society. And what we got driven into us was the notion that with the opportunity and gifts that we had, we needed to serve. We had to give back. So service was kind of drummed into us. Now, their imagination about service had to do with public office or, you know, that kind of thing in the larger public sphere. I subverted that. I think mostly because I was kind of angry that I didn't get the attention that I wanted. Oh, poor me. And so after college, I went over the wall and kind of became a hippie. And not kind of, although I never was really good hippie material. I was conservative, but in radical clothing and guise. And well, okay, the story is after I got a high draft number, I dropped out of graduate school. And my friend John and I moved into an abandoned train station and built a house inside of it for fun. And then I got into the rock and roll business for a while. So that was my misspent youth. And the day I wised up and figured that out, I met Baba Haridas. The day I sold the business that I had, I met Baba Haridas. And it wasn't bells and whistles, but it was a thread. And I picked up the thread, and here it is now 47 years later. So how has my view changed? Well, I don't know if it's changed or it's reverted back to a more natural state. See, I think our search is for an authentic self. And I think when you can arrive at authenticity, this whole brain works in a different way, because we're not saying yes or no to please others. We're saying yes or no from ourselves, which means that we have the facility to actually take in the information and create an adequate response in the present. Because when we say yes or no to please others, or we say yes or no because of some trauma, or we say yes or no out of fear or greed, or so on, then we are creating joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain. We're creating the pairs of opposites because of our attachment, avoidance of pain, pursuit of pleasure. And of course, we know from the Gita and other Indian texts, equanimity in the pairs of opposites is the path. In Buddhism, the middle path between the extremes, which is a hard thing to hang on to in the pairs of opposite of when we're either afraid of an outcome or we desire an outcome. We're tipping the balance in one direction or another in terms of our reactions to things. So the authentic self, I don't know exactly what that is yet. I'm still working on it. But I think in part, we have to dig through the layers of our conditioning and be able to reflect on it so that we can choose better. And I remember Baba Haridas saying, yoga begins when we try to develop positive qualities. So this process of union is removing everything that's in between us and a state of peaceful awareness. It doesn't mean the emotions aren't there. They're there, but we don't get attached to them or create a story about them. I don't know. That's as much as I got to say about that.
Thank you, Essen. I think the way you opened up so vulnerably about your childhood, how you've grown up, I think some parts of the story were also new for me. And like, I think Anisha, even some more people in the circle would resonate with that, because we suffer from that middle child syndrome, not enough attention, not being wanted. And I was like, oh, this part I didn't know. And I think what struck me just now was you mentioning that how, you know, you grew up in an environment where, there was lack of emotional availability. And when I look at your role as an educator, in the spaces of service, like Mount Madonna Center, like Sri Ram Ashram, i I see that learning has, been rooted in integrating various intellectual, social, emotional, and cultural contexts. So, in the journey that you have taken through these spaces of service, how is it that you have, kept the inner journey at the core of all this, external work? How have you managed to, stay rooted in that inner work through this process?
That's such a good question. I think it's the simple answer is surviving my mistakes and not giving up. Um, because it's been a very challenging journey. And I think the journey is really that of, in an odd way, I chose a public life in a fairly benign atmosphere. I've noticed if you get into politics, you better be wearing armor because that's a really tough game. Babaji used to say, where there's fame, there's defame. Oh yeah. So when I've just finished 2 years finishing 2 years as executive director of Mount Madonna Center, and this was after Babaji has passed away. And let me tell you, it's not fun, because the amount of criticism. Well, I got a lot, and I deserved a fair amount of it. So when I came into the Hanuman Fellowship, which created Mount Madonna Center, and became a student of Baba Haridas's, he said about me one time, he said, it's hard to find a horse like that, which meant that I worked hard and I finished what I started, and I paid attention and did what was needed. So those were the virtues that I brought. But along with that, I brought a need for approval. In an uncertain world, what we grab for is control. And I could say I had some control issues, still do. I'm trying to learn to let go of that need, to have an adequate response in the ever-changing present, but worrying about the future is part of my DNA. And so there's that struggle. So I don't know if it was holding on to something. I think it was commitment and perseverance, and then standing in the fire. And I actually learned to stand in fire through making mistakes. So I think mistakes are really important. Now, there's a whole beautiful thing on mistakes on what do they call them? The TED Talks. Check it out sometime. But here's the question. What does it feel like to make a mistake? Okay, this is a spoiler alert, but the woman who does the talk says, what does it feel like to make a mistake? She gets some people down front. And someone says, oh, I feel so bad. I feel ashamed. I feel guilty. She says, actually, that's not true. When you make a mistake, it doesn't feel like anything. It's when you know you made a mistake that all that stuff comes in. And so we blissfully go along thinking we're doing our best and thinking we're doing our best. And then we discover later on, oh, wow, that was pretty unconscious. That was pretty unkind. That was stupid. I mean, fill in the blank. But if you don't make the mistake, you don't have the realization. So when I got into the rock and roll business, I owned a nightclub. I wanted to be the center of something and be in control of something. And, we thought music was going to change the world, and probably it's one of the things it does. And then about 6 months in, I realized, oh my God, I have gotten myself in deep. And I decided that rather than run from it, I would stand in it until it was done. And I didn't know when that would be. 3.5 years later, it was done. I had done the things that I felt I needed to do, and I knew it was time. And the day that I cleared the sale of the business, a banker friend had invited me to a satsang with Baba Haridas in California. And so I gave myself, I thought I needed character development. So I gave myself an opportunity for standing in something for 2+ years. standing in a place I didn't want to be because I had put myself there. I took responsibility. Now, was that the smart thing? I have no idea. But it did work out synchronistically that the next bus came along just as soon as I got off the other bus. And then it was a gradual process, of getting engaged there. And then I used the experience of what went before to help organize this fledgling organization until I reached the point where I had utilized everything I had already known. I went to Babaji one day and I said, I've done everything I know how to do. And from here on, I don't have a clue. And he took out his chalkboard and he said, me either. So we've been rowboating into the fog ever since then. So I think it's a matter of making a commitment to fill in the blank and then persevering. Because, quote, the spiritual path, whatever that is, the main reason people leave it is non-attainment of a stage. You don't feel like you're getting anywhere. I remember one time this guy from Germany who was a very good student came to the center and he said to me, we were in the shoe room one day, and he said to me, I've had some bad weeks of meditation. And I looked at him and I said, I've had some bad decades. What are you talking about? But you have to just go on walking, go on walking, keep going. What choice do you have? Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but great question. I don't know if it was a good answer, but there you are.
Thank you so much, Sadanand. It's so beautiful that you said that you kept making mistakes and staying along. That's what enabled you to, hold inner journey of, whatever name we might call it, along with doing all the spectacular projects that you and the team undertook. I actually have two questions. You spoke about commitment in the end and just persevering. So I'll briefly ask. Let me choose which one do I want to ask first. You also spoke about Babaji's role in your life, and all of us, perhaps have work in different organizations, and even in our elder generation, we see many, many tall leaders, who stand alone almost and have stood alone. It seems like they've stood alone for a really long time with one cause, one organization, and they become a voice of their own. And we have had these conversations before about, leadership that keeps one person at the center, one charismatic leader, one sage on the stage. And it definitely serves, and perhaps in the political and dominant spaces, we don't see another way yet. But in many other spaces that are more cultural, more contextual, more shared, what do you see from your own experiences, especially, towards the end of Babaji leaving his body? What do you see the challenges of this model of leadership, which keeps one man, mostly man, at the center and or stage on the stage? And also tell us a little about your experiment or your thought process around collaborative leadership, of having like a core group which is able to hold everything together.
That's it.
Yeah, I didn't ask the other question.
You ask complicated questions, but the simple answer is that in the shade of the big tree, the little tree doesn't grow as well. It grows, but it doesn't grow as well. Now, the shade is useful at one point, but Babaji's teacher, I've been actually looking at his lineage. It goes back a long time, but his teacher basically told him that, he said he wanted to be near his teacher, and his teacher said, "No, you're not going to grow if you hang out with me." I think he had 6 or 7 conversations with his teacher. The guy would show up, Raghubar Das would show up, say some stuff to them and leave and come back a year later or whenever, 2 years later, and show up and say something and leave. So there's no perfect system. There's no right answer to this. The right answer is it depends. So having somebody, we're all teachers. All of us are teachers. We're all leaders. The question is, how are you leading? And leading is modeling. And Babaji's power as a leader was his behavior. So how we choose to act in life is our act of leadership. Some of us hide, some of us are dominant, some of us are all gradients in between, but your life is your message. We're not victims here. But I think often we make ourselves victims when we think the world does things to us. But our response is our act of leadership to what happens to us in life. And we can see the same conditions get applied to all different people, and they all have different responses. So there's a value to having an iconic leader, a symbol, especially if their behavior, if they're living, what we conserve in our living is what we pass on to the people around us. And so he conserved discipline, hard work, fun, creativity. He conserved those things in his living. And so there was a gravitational pull. And when you concentrate on something, you draw energy into that. This goes back to the kind of very fundament of what you concentrate on is what you care about. And when you concentrate, that is what draws in more energy to what you're doing. And I've seen that happen. So leadership isn't about telling people what to do I'm trying to expose myself as a very unwise person who's just doing their best because that's who we all are, and maybe we become a little bit wise, but if we're putting ourselves up, we're really setting up the opportunity for us to knock ourselves or be knocked down. And so humility is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Where there's fame, there's defame, and we imagine that if we get more control or more power and the world will listen to us. It doesn't. After Prajapati created all the creatures, they just went about their creature business. So we need to go into recovery from imagining that other people should change. They will change on their own in their own time. So it's our behavior that we need to be concerned about. And then our dharma, what is our nature, and act out of our nature. And of course the big question is, what's my dharma? Well, that's another conversation. So dependency is not a good thing. But in the beginning, we need support. The support can be from a group. The support can be from a teacher, a loved one. We need that support. But when you said they stand on their own, that is the authenticity of a human being, to be who they are and to operate from that center. And we live in a relational world. We cannot be who we are without others. Right? Advaita, we're distinct, but we're not separate. And if we isolate, we lose energy. And then we need to connect. So this fundamental thing of being distinct, but also really realizing that we need each other, is an important facet. Now, the question that you're really asking is, how can we live collaboratively? Because one, finding a teacher with the kind of integrity that allows them to become a teacher without becoming abusive in some way or another, or egoistic or narcissistic, or, all of that. Very rare. More likely to find colleagues, and your teachers appear when you're ready, because it means you're open to learning. And learning is everywhere, but we're not always open to learning. So how do we engage collegially? Well, it's love, allowing the other to appear as legitimate other. The legitimacy of other means that they have their identity, authenticity, their reasoning and emotioning. Their way of seeing the world has its legitimacy from their point of view. But often we feel threatened because we have our point of view and our reasoning and our explanation, and we want that explanation to dominate. So from a neurobiological standpoint, we look at what we call structural coupling. And so when we engage voluntarily, repeatedly, there's a structural coupling that goes along. Now, in that structural coupling, autopoiesis has to be able to continue. Autopoiesis is self-making. Each of us is a self-making system. And the purpose of the system is to create itself. If we're in relationships that are not good for our autopoiesis, then we can disintegrate. And so we have to disengage in order to survive. So what we're doing in general is we're looking for like-minded people, which means people with whom there is an acceptance of the criteria of validation of whatever it is that you're talking about. That's a community. Community is inclusion in a conversation. Satsang. This is our satsang. This is our community. It's a voluntary association of people who can acknowledge each other as legitimate others. The problem with the iconic centralized leader is often that it is manipulative or coercive in some way, not for the benefit of the whole, but for the benefit of the person. And we see this over and over and over again, that as Lord Acton said, power is corrupting and absolute power is absolutely corrupting. So that's where I think we're at the stage of migrating from the hero to the iconic leader into the collaborative. And of course, there's a lot of evidence about that. You all know more about that probably than I do. So it doesn't mean that you don't have teachers. It doesn't mean you don't have people you look up to, but you don't want to become dependent. A good teacher, a good leader creates leaders. A good leader leaves people independent, not dependent.
Thank you.
This also has to do a lot with how we do good in the world. Because I know you're all here because you want to be good people and you want to do good in the world. But when you project your idea of good on someone else, that's kind of a violation. So we have to be curious about people, about what is their sense of the good, and support that. So Pedagogy of the Oppressed, good book to read about that. First half of it, or first 2/3 of it. Last part was advice. Don't pay attention to it. Okay, I'm done.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Sadanand Ji. I'm just repeating it for my own self and kind of trying to bring it out to ask the next question. That you said that love is letting other appear as a legitimate other.
Yeah,
and
that's one definition.
Yeah.
It's not romantic love. Romantic love is more like warfare.
Yeah.
Well, why is it more like warfare? That's kind of a ridiculous thing to say because it's so intoxicating. But what there is a struggle about, in some ways, about, oh, if I love this person and they don't love me, I'm down. If they love me and I don't love them, I'm up. And that's the stress of it, is to have the confidence to love and be loved. That's why I say it's like warfare. I didn't want to just leave that one hanging.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So much of what you're sharing, Sadanand Ji, is kind of illuminating what goes on as an internal process. What you said exactly in the beginning, that making the implicit explicit. So
Yeah.
much of what you're saying is giving language to that implicit process that perhaps goes through in one way or another in all of us.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. Uh, I think we'll also open the room at this point. And in the questions that we had invited on the sign up form, there were 2 or 3 people who had asked about uh, science and spirituality. Abhishek, if you're here, you want to read your question, or I can read it for you. It will be amazing if you can read. Abhishek, are you here with us? Uh, so there were multiple framing of the same question, but the way Abhishek asked this is that how to combine Western science with Eastern concepts of consciousness. That is, Vigyan plus Atmagyan, and connecting with the external is easy, as the current system pushes us to do. How to call out the connection with inner self? That was this question.
I don't know. When you find out the answer to that, let me know. And I think it's very clever of Abhishek to give you a question and leave the room. So he's exercised his freedom. He may still be there and doing something else, but first to say there is no separation between science and spirituality. That's a construct. The Cartesian split happens. The Cartesian split is such a problem, right? So Descartes at one point said, okay, we realize that the religious entities, this is in the Western world, have a lot of power. So tell you what, we'll deal with the material stuff and you can have the spiritual stuff. That's the Cartesian split. There's a Cartesian split between emotion and reason, but they're distinct, but they're not separate. And as I said just a little while ago, spiritual inquiry has so many of the hallmarks of scientific inquiry and vice versa, which is you can't be inquiring into the nature of reality with the presumption that you want it to be what you want it to be. You can't determine the outcome of the experiment, and still have an experiment. So Gandhi's experiment in truth, this is an experiment in truth. We're all experimenting. And I'm guessing that in this beautiful collaboration that we can help each other discover. And I just don't see the separation between science and spirituality. I'm going to take that off my resume. I told you I was interested in it because I was kind of surprised that I was engaged with a great scientist, until I realized that his scientific inquiry was spiritual. So yeah, I think I almost have to say there's no answer to that question because it's not a question. How do we reconcile that in ourselves is up to each of us. And I think that the words themselves are problematic. Science, spirituality, you know, they're distinct, but they're not separate. And so science is an attempt to be more aware of the medium, cause and effect in the world around us. Spirituality is about cause and effect within us and in the how we relate to the world around us. So we're perturbed by the medium, by the world around us, each other and our environment and everything that happens into it. But it perturbs, but does not specify how we respond. Only we do that. Now, there are extreme circumstances where I suppose if you get hit on the head, you pass out, you're not really in control of that. But in the things we are in, have some responsibility, right? That then we're trying to figure out what's out here and what's in here. The thing that we're mostly missing is our observation of the observer. So that's what Maturana calls observation in parentheses. We realize that we as observers, in our observing, are coloring what we observe. It's not the solipsistic view that it's all in the mind. It's a both and. It's out there and in here. But what we're perceiving from out there is as much in here as it is out there. So that's kind of getting into the ether of the whole consciousness thing. But I would have to say that science and spirituality, science conducted properly is deeply spiritual, and spirituality conducted deeply is scientific. There's no difference.
Thank you, Sadanand Ji, for sharing and making
Well, that's just a thought. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
It's just an opinion.
Hmm.
I'm willing to be wrong. I'm
Everyone
going to
has a
keep
responsibility.
studying and find out whether whether that it's a theory that I am looking at to see if it holds true.
May I ask something? Like, possible to share?
Well, what do you got?
So I see that what you're making a correlation between is the process of scientific inquiry and spirituality.
Yeah.
And how I understand is also that how science at least tries to create some kind of objectivity present for all of human beings, reaction, and laws of motion and all of those things. I don't understand spirituality at all, I would say, to
Me either.
think about to think of what the content of that would be, but wouldn't that make a little bit of difference because it builds upon that content. Everybody agrees on something related to the world outside, the physical aspect of it, and then we build upon it. We keep figuring out and discovering more, finding out something was wrong, and improvising it, changing it. So the process might probably would be the same, but would you say the nature of content? I don't know. Again, Mike, I don't know if the question is also right because I don't understand the content of spirituality.
I think I understand your question, and my response would be they're both about awareness. So science is about awareness of cause and effect. We get curious about why something is, or we want to develop the ability to create something, a cause and effect. So in our curiosity, what we're trying to do is become more aware of the reality, the physical reality, so that we can replicate things, and it gets proved by experimentation. I think in what we call spirituality, which is a word that is also hard for me, that in some ways, well, not in some ways, my belief is that the reason that we're alive is to become more aware. That's the human experiment. And that nature, affirms that, in that over however many billions of years, we move from chemical to biological to aware to higher and higher levels of sentience, which means that there's some yearning in the natural sphere of things to know, to become aware. And the experiment has taken us from the human brain tripled in size over a period of time, according to Maturana, because people lived in intimacy, trust, and cooperation. And the chimpanzee brain, which we bifurcated at some point off that, stayed the same because they lived in dominance and submission. And so the question is, are we at the peak of the human experiment and beginning to devolve? Possible. It's not all or nothing, but I think there are people who are still evolving, but society seems to be devolving into dominance and submission because of the circumstances that surround us. And so, and some of our institutions, in order to produce predictable outcomes, have contributed to the devolutionary process, where people get, quote, dehumanized by the processes that destroy their relatedness to others, destroy compassion or empathy or curiosity. That's the danger. So I don't, that in that sense, I think awareness is at the root of it. I think if we want to differentiate, we would say that spirituality has a focus of the observing the observer in parentheses. Objectivity is within parentheses, because we always realize as observers, our vision or view is limited. So in science, something is true until it's proven not to be true. And we're always open to that possibility that we may get more information or more understanding. As we see, we've gone into more and more minute aspects. When Maturana studied perception, he looked at the pigeon's eye to see what happened when the pigeon saw color, and nothing happened. And he kept going finer and finer, and nothing happened in the eye. Then he realized that color was inside, not outside. And that when it reflected off the back part of the brain and came back to the part of the brain that filters all that stuff up and comes up with some kind of imaging, the color red appeared in certain circumstances, just like blue, green, and others, except in people who are deficient in that, who are colorblind, right? So the world is inside and outside. Vashishtha said the same thing.
Yeah.
The Solapistic view is that it's only inside, but the Advaita view is that it's inside and outside. There is a reality, but we don't see it because of the way we color it with our consciousness. So it's objectivity in parentheses. Objectivity without parentheses says there's an objective world that does things to me. That's my understanding. Now, truth is another thing. So what I understand today, if I change my mind, I'll let you know, and that'll be what I understand tomorrow.
Thank you.
I'm still learning.
Good. Let's all do that.
Yeah, let's do that. And if you learn something, please let me know. Okay.
I will want to do that.
Ayushi has a question, and Chitra as well.
I have a question about, we talked about walking.
About what?
So that is about walking.
Walking.
Sadanand Ji, you said that it's about making a commitment to something and then persevering, just keep going on, keep walking.
Yeah.
But walking is a long process and you don't know where you're going to reach. Walking forward with something also means leaving behind something because you're going to move forward.
Yeah.
So how do you decide that what direction do you want to commit to? This commitment is for a long time. So how do you decide what direction do you want to move in right now and then 10 years later maybe a different direction and then 10 years later maybe a different direction. But right now, how do you decide? Because all you have is right now. You don't have the next 10 years.
Yeah.
How do you
That's a
decide?
brilliant question. It's central to every human life. Aim. What's my aim? It's a similar question to what's my dharma, right? Dharma means truth, path, virtue, but in its essence, dharma is the nature of a thing. And so what is my nature? And how do I enact the promise that was made the day I was born? How do I act out of my own nature? And I remember one time I was involved in a process of trying to get something for the group, and we got denied by the city council. And I'm a fighter. I was going back in and appealing it. And Babaji said to me, he said, finish what's worth finishing. So your discernment, and this is the fundamental thing, the fundamental operation of any structure determined system, autopoietic system, is that of making distinctions. Interestingly enough, in the spiritual process, from Samkhya philosophy, as we meditate and move up in our ability to still the mind, we go to higher and higher levels of discernment, of making distinctions. So the practical journey of life and the spiritual journey of life are also not different. They're about developing greater and greater discernment. So what do I do right now? That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that. You are the only one that can answer that question. But I think reflection, and I've been doing a lot of this lately. I just took about 10 days off and went back to my family place in Virginia and spent quite a bit of time reflecting. And I had so many questions that I came up with that I need to continuously reflect on. For me at my age, what do I do with the time that remains to me? I have the same question you have. You just have a longer future, right? How did I get here? How did I get where I am now? That's an interesting question. What is my aim? What do I want? That's a very deep question. There's a lot of layers to it. And when I think about that, what's the declaration I want to make right now about what I'm doing for now? And as you said so importantly, in a little while, I may change my mind. That's one of the fundamental freedoms that a human being has, is to change their mind. So you have to decide for yourself, what's my next step? Where am I going? And it's based on aim. Then I think there's a reflection of, why is that my aim? Did somebody tell me to do that? Is it cultural? There's some wonderful things about culture, but there's some not so wonderful things about culture if they restrict you from this process of self-discovery. And so it's a both and of having to support ourselves in the world and do certain practical things, but that seems to have overtaken everything else. And we've become a bit robotic in trying to achieve what culture says is success. And maybe in that we leave behind who we actually are. So the last thing my father said to me before he passed away was, I admire you because you've lived your life the way you chose to live it. Now, I think he gave me way too much credit. I was just trying to survive and doing the next thing and so on. I did what occurred to me to do. But I was certainly fulfilling the family dharma in becoming a public servant, in a manner of speaking. I was trying to fulfill my dharma just in a strange way. And so you choose. And the thing is, when we choose, the tough thing is taking responsibility for our choices. So what changed my life was doing something stupid and taking responsibility for it. So if I hadn't done something stupid, we wouldn't be talking here today. I took responsibility for my choice, and it moved me in an unexpected, unpredictable direction. Life is not predictable. It's surprising how a life turns out. It's a series of choices. So the more we understand our motivations, I think the better chance we have. So how have I been conditioned to be who I am? You know, when we're all conditioned by a culture, by family, and by that strange, unpredictable interiority of who we are and what we choose. So if you want surety, that's going to be really hard. To have the right answer, that's impossible. You know, you can think it's the right answer, but who knows? If it works, call it the right answer. I still don't know. But actually, at this stage of life, I can't afford to care that much. I'm just going to keep going. And what happens around me, you all are happening around me right now. I must have done something right to be hanging out with people like you. I mean, what a wonderful gift that you are. I'm just saying. You ask questions that make me think about the things that matter to me. Wow. Talk about an emotional support group. It's very therapeutic. And when you ask me why I'm here for love. I'm getting a lot of that. Thank you.
We're getting a lot of that too from you.
I love you guys. If you got to give it to get it.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions that have come on the chat. Kabir's question was, how do you make distinction between whether perseverance is harming or nourishing? Maybe that was touched upon by what you shared.
Yeah,
Chitra,
discernment, your own discernment, and maybe you get some help from your friends, but watch out for advice.
Yeah. Chitra has a long question that I'll read.
Okay.
She says that I have a question about emotions. Wondering if I may request you to ask. Oh, sorry. She's asking me that my connectivity is poor. So she's saying, if I tell myself that I want to act with more compassion, I find that I fail to do so, and I'm left with much frustration and violence. In contrast, if I let myself step into inner silence, I act and later see that I have acted from compassion and feel much joy and tenderness.
Beautiful.
It seems then that walking in joy is walking in silence. However, many emotions are so loud and energy intensive that they seem to make the process of finding subtle and quiet challenging. What does it mean then to connect with emotions? Does it mean to identify with them? The fear is of being thrown so far that one can't find their way back to silence again?
Wow, that is brilliant. Or is she on? Do I see her face? I don't see her face. I would applaud that question. The answer's in the question. And really a brilliant summation. When we talk about, if I identify with the emotion, I'm stuck. And I create a story about it. And the story perpetuates the emotion. Emotions, according to one group of people, last 6 seconds if we don't attach a story to it. There's an organization called 6 Seconds. And what that, it's the release of peptides. And I mean, so we're talking chemistry, but thoughts produce emotions, emotions produce thoughts. So it's a self-fulfilling circle as to what peptides you're operating on. So the question and the answer are kind of the same. I would say the number one defense is curiosity. Okay. So when compassion, curiosity, empathy, love, compassion, right? That's a chain that it takes you somewhere. So if you want to be compassionate, start by being curious. Just that's the physics of it, or one aspect of the physics. Some people are naturally compassionate. I wasn't one of those. And so I found the doorway through curiosity. Other than that, you've nailed it. Go to silence. When you find yourself disturbed, you go to silence. You reflect, breathe, do your mantra. I don't know, go get ice cream, distract yourself. Talk to a friend, go for a run, all the things that we do. Change your mind. Don't let the emotion control you. And that is so hard. In the moment, it's so hard. Emotions are real. They just change. And, then that is what we're doing at that point. The worst one, of course, is anger. And there's a whole derivation of anger, of different forms of anger and so on. In the 50 specific vrittis, most of them don't help. Each of the petals in the chakra system is a specific thought wave. It's a matrika, a letter of the Sanskrit alphabet, and it's a thought wave. Most of them are not useful. I don't know who figured that out, but okay, I'm done with that question. I don't know the answer to it.
Vibhuti and Neha have a question, and we're all acknowledging that we're 5 minutes over. Maybe we'll take another 5 to.
Yeah, I
close.
think, I need to go somewhere at 9:15. I knew we would probably go a little bit long, but I also know you're very disciplined and you would kick me out sooner rather than later.
We're glad that you accommodated us and our time before your meeting in the morning.
Well, this is wonderful for me. Go ahead.
Neha, Vibhuti, whoever wants to share.
Vibhuti, go for it.
I just have a fear SN won't like to answer my question. As SN, I was asking, you've always mentioned that, Indians give a lot of advice and you've refrained from advising because you say that it's someone's unfinished business.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, as you look back on your life, if you do have any advice for the younger generation, for people around you, like, is there any unfinished business of yours that you would like somebody else to pick up?
Yes. Yes, because all rules are made to be broken. We know that. You can't say always, and absolutes just very hard to deal with. Be curious. That's it. Stay curious. And that's my unfinished business. Everything I don't know, I want you to be curious about. Help me, because your transformation is the world's transformation. We don't change the world by changing other people. We've got to be in recovery from changing other people. Doesn't work. Our transformation is the world's transformation. And people might not even notice, but viscerally they will. Okay. How's that for let me add a piece of advice that connects with that. Okay. And if you don't like that one, here, try this one. Know yourself, which of course requires curiosity. That came from Dr. Kshama Maitre, who's one of my heroes. That's it. All done?
There's another by Parul. Parul, is it okay if we let it go? Just on that boundary now.
Well,
I'll nevertheless read the question. She says, what is more important, prayer, meditation, yoga, or work?
Prayer, meditation, yoga.
Or work.
Yes.
That was quite a succinct answer.
Prayer is the most authentic act of a human being. Pay attention to your prayers, but you have to pray in order to pay attention to them. What do I pray for? Prayer is a concentration. Meditation is a concentration. Work is a concentration. They all reinforce each other. They all matter. The work we do in the world matters. Krishna says, I'm consciousness itself and I don't have to do anything, but I work because if I stopped working, everybody else would stop working. So the idea, Arjuna said, hey, I want to leave the battle. I think I'll start to meditate. And he said, you'll be the laughing stock of everybody. He ripped him for that. He said, you got to do your duty. Do your duty. Work is your duty. And so one way to overcome egoism and attachment is to do your work in the world, do your duty in the world as a duty, not to get something. That's why we have karma yoga. It doesn't mean you don't get something back from it, but it means that you're doing your effort for its own sake out of a sense of duty. And you have a duty to your family and to your country and to your culture and to your community and so on. But that's all in the field of discernment. So there's no distinction there. The separations we create are other forms of the Cartesian split. If work is love made visible, as some wise person said, I love work. Makes me feel good to do things. So it's a great question. It's a perfect question. Thank you for that question. The answer is yes. I could have left it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Parul. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. It was quite a conversation. I think each time we have this kind of satsangs with Sadanand Ji, it's very, very rich. And it takes a while to even kind of understand or really kind of arrive at the meaning of the depth from which he's coming sometimes. And I keep taking notes usually a lot and keep going back to them. So thank you, Sadanand Ji, for joining us as well and taking your time right in the morning, early morning for you.
I want to ask a question before I go.
Okay.
Well, your homework is to think about your aim. What do I care about? Notice your prayers, and then discern if that's the prayer you really want, you know? So think about, try to think a little bit about aim, because everything kind of funnels into that. And it doesn't matter, you know, I mean, it does matter what your aim is in terms of outcomes ultimately, but your aim can change, you know, and as you mature, it will change. You know, as you grow older, it will, I don't know about maturing. I haven't done that yet, but as I get older, my aim has changed. And I'm trying to refine my aim. I would just like to hear 3 responses as one thing you heard that struck you, and then I can go away content. From anybody. And be brief because we're running out of time. What did you hear that struck you? Just 3 responses.
I think I'll quickly go and share. I think many statements which I've written in my notebook, but this one, which is the prayers are the most authentic of human acts. I think this is something which I'm just walking back with.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
I think I'd also say one thing. The thing that struck me is that when you said we are all in search of our authentic self, and that is all that we need. So when you meet your authentic self, you know your mind functions in a different way. So I was
Yes.
very much struck by that thought.
Thank you. Thank you. And for reminding me what I'm doing. Akor?
Okay, I can go next. Yes. Yeah. So for me, it is that the fundamental freedom which we as humans have is just to change our mind. And just live with that and keep being curious as our mind keeps changing and evolving.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. Life is an abstract art, you know, so it can be anything. Or it can't be anything, but it certainly can be something. You know, when they say you can be anything, you can't be anything, but you can be something. So let me just say what a great blessing it is for me to be with you all. I am the ultimate beneficiary here. I know that. And I mean, for me, I'm the ultimate beneficiary of you. You give me hope and love and meaning and purpose. And, you know, I see you as, you know, my future in what you care about and the fact that you showed up. So in deep, deep appreciation for who you are and the meaning you bring to my life.
Sadanand Ji said that you all are really a great hope. I was so impressed and I was so happy to just see all of you and hear your questions, and it was a really great hope, because we are always looking forward to have some young people like you all who are curious and looking for the meaning in life. So I don't know how and how can I connect, but it would be really my great pleasure to know your group and what you do and things like that. I don't know how to do that. Maybe you can suggest. I can give my email or phone number. You have it. Otherwise, because I registered. But I really would like to connect with you. It is really because I work with children and young people. So having some people like you is a great, it gives me a lot of hope and fulfillment. So
Yeah.
I'm very glad.
Thank you so much, Parvati, for joining us. And we really resonate. And I think we would love to connect more. We could connect like, one-on-one also, and how we could support or just find ways to work together. But thank you so much for joining us. And you're very much part of us. Maybe we didn't meet before this, but we've been working together.
Sure.
So we'll maybe share our numbers with you. We have your numbers on email, so we'll share on that, and then we could continue, and we'll keep sharing this also the satsang, fortnightly satsang with you. So to all the people who register, so that will also be nice places to meet.
Sure. And I've just left my email address and my phone number on the chat.
Yes.
So if you can, yeah, it would be really great to connect with you all.
Yes, yes.
Mhm. Oh,
Vibhuti,
so you
yeah.
know Isha? Oh,
Yeah, Parulji. We know Isha very deeply. We worked with her, and she shared so much about you and your partner
oh,
and the journey at Sheshav and everything that you do in Gujarat.
oh.
We
So
know of
how do
you.
where you know her? Like I don't know how.
We met.
Are you anyone of Fuji?
No, I think Shashank and I both met her at Swaraj first, and
Uh-huh.
we've continued to, partner. Like Isha and I hosted the rethinking in Swaraj a few years back. We also did a clowning thing, I think a few months ago on Zoom. She's been a good friend for some years, and we know of you. You might not have known us, but we've known you really well.
Oh, okay. Okay. So great. So now I know that. I mean, I was like, how would I connect? So it was good. Good that now I know Isha can through Isha I can connect with her.
Yes.
Okay. Actually, the kind of work that Isha is doing for her, we really need some team for her. And with her, who can who is trying to make some changes in the world. So we really need some so and young people. So if you know of anyone in your group or across in your networks, please connect us.
Thank you. Yes. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody. Next न्यू मून पे मिलेंगे. I think 8 अगस्त को है, तो देखते हैं अभी फाइनल हुआ इसके साथ. Thank you. Have a
Bye.
good
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Because
ये मैंने सवाल था, मैं सवाल पूछा नहीं, एक सवाल पूछना था मुझे. अब मुझे तो लोगों के सवाल इतने अच्छे थे, मैं खो गया उसमें.
यार अपना रिकॉर्डिंग बंद कर दो.
I know कौन है host को